All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's great to see the level of participation that we're getting. It's also great to see some familiar names in the participant list. We're going to go ahead and get started. So, what we wanted to bring you together to talk about today is looking at trade data and looking at um, how much can we trust this trade data? When we speak to the industry about it, you'll always have questions that come up like, all right, well, yeah, the export data from Peru or this country or that country, yeah, it's all right, but they always, they're not really reporting the truth, this, that, or the other. So we looked at this data scientifically, and what we hope to do with the new tool that we're rolling out right now, the degree of certainty tool, is measure in time how accurate this information is. So that's kind of the topic of conversation, and we're very happy to bring you along on this journey with us. So as we dive in, we'd also like to invite you, if you're going to be at Fruit Attraction or the Global Produce and Floral Show, and would like to set up a one-on-one meeting, look at this privately, and get into more details with it, um, please write to us at info@agronometrics.com, and we'd be very happy to set up a meeting and follow up on this presentation, answer any questions you might otherwise have, and hopefully offer you a tool that you could find useful in your company to better understand the world, better understand your market and your commodities. Before we get started, for those of you who don't know us, I'd like to introduce the company. The name is Agronometrics. We are a market intelligence company that looks to make sense of trade data for the fresh produce industry. So functionally, what we do is we go out there and collect a ton of data about the industry. We synthesize it, we standardize it, we take all of the data science work out of, or like the programming data work out of accessing this information, and we try to put it in your hands in as easy a format as we possibly can. Many people know us for the work that we've done with the USDA data. So we already have access to a lot of commodities within that product, and that gives a very good overview of the latest information available for the US market. The new product that we rolled out last year is the Blueberry Global Trade Data, which we're going to get into in a bit more detail. And this is where we're going to be able to see the work that we've done with the degree of certainty tool. Part of our role in making data accessible is also the communication aspect of it. So for that, we built our stories, and we very much invite you to, this is a free service for the industry. Every single story we've put together with a chart of some sort or another. That's kind of that's kind of what we do. We make data available through charts. So all of these stories are complemented with this data to help give it an objective, or at least a different perspective to what might otherwise be made available by the industry. Kind of heading further down the rabbit hole, the Blueberry Global Trade Data, what we've done with this product is brought together all of the trade data that we've have found, that we've been able to compile from around the world in one database. This tool features most prominently in the International Blueberry Organization State of the Blueberry Industry Report. But what we've done is literally taken all of the data reported by the US, by Canada, by Chile, Peru, the EU, China, South Africa, all of the major players, and we brought it together under one system, under one roof, so that you don't need to worry about any of that. With the global trade data system, all you need to know is I want to go see what's going on with Chilean blueberries. You click on Chile, and all of the information that we have available, all of the trade data, imports, exports, history, prices, volumes, and value is made available within this tool. This opens up the conversation into the degrees of certainty tool. Because, so this is the global trade data. We have this huge amount of data. I mean, it's every country in the world. And then the question is, all right, how much do we trust this point? And this week is particularly interesting because this is the largest week-on-week jump in Peruvian exports that we have ever seen in the history of the country. So the question is, how much do we trust this data? And we have this tool over here on the right, which is the degree of certainty tool. And you can't really see just because of the resolution of the chart, but what we're able to calculate looking at how this information is updated is that this information is incredibly trustworthy. Peru updates their export information as the information gets updated. Once volume is loaded onto a ship and it heads out to sea, I mean, by and large, it's been exported. There's not a whole lot to change. And Peru seems to do a really good job reporting on that. What we've been able to measure, looking at what's been reported and how that updates in time, there has never been an adjustment that is larger than 170 metric tons in the entire set of history that we're currently working with. So what we do is make that information available through this chart on the right. So here we can see what the reported value was. We can see what the estimated value was, which I'll describe in a little bit more detail coming up here, and then the error range. And that error range takes into account all of the variance that we've seen in the past, and helps us set an expectation for how that might vary going into the future. So in the case of Peru, this export information that we have available, and this is last week's export numbers, for as best as we've been able to measure and what we've been able to compare between exports and then arrivals on the other side, be it in the US or the EU, is this information is incredibly reliable. And this makes this information incredibly powerful. If you know what these numbers are, what is being exported, and not only from Peru as a whole, but we have the breakout by each one of the destination markets, then we have a decent idea of what's going to be arriving. So you want to predict the future. I mean, this industry relies on that. If you want to know what's going to happen in the US when Peru is the major supplier, which as is the case now, or the EU or China, this is your best available indicator of what will happen in the next 4 to 5 weeks, especially as far as volumes are. But that isn't the extent of the depth that this tool offers. As mentioned before, with the global trade data, we've collected the volume, the price, and the value for every single country in the world. We make that available through different charts. So here you got the last 10 years, and you can see the evolution of Peru. And then here you have the historical information. So this is right out of global trade data. And you can see the massive leap that we're able to see in week 38 compared to I mean, pretty much every other year that we have on record. And here we have the pricing. So we've used pretty much the same algorithm. It's the same components to look at this data in the same way. What we can see in prices kind of brings to light a different facet of this tool. So not only are we measuring how much error there is in time, but we're also making an estimate based on the difference between what is reported right now and how that will update in history, what the estimated value will become. So, and basically, if we're going to put this in layman's terms, what we can see is that the initial pricing is lower than it will eventually be. So it's underreported. The value of exports are underreported. We can see that in the history. I mean, just this precipitous fall is probably not realistic. Like to anybody that's going to look at this, you can say it smells funny. So the question is it stable? How is it consistently low? Which it is. Like we can see that from working in it. How consistent is that drop? And can we use that to kind of estimate what the actual values will be in the future? And so that's exactly what we've done. We can see that on, so in the last week of information that we have available, the error range is about 27%, give or take. The second week is about, I want to say 19, and then that drops very quickly down to about 5. So what we did to calculate this estimate is took the raw data that we received and then add in that historical error that we've been able to measure. And then we add the bounding box. So how much has this specific error point varied in time based on the amount of history that we have to work with? And that gives us an expectation of what the error range is. And I think this tool, like other than being academically very, very interesting, it offers some very definite utility to the industry. At least, obviously, we are not traders; we're analysts. I would like to think that traders can use this information to make decisions and to make better decisions in the industry. Those decisions can be something like, I mean, say you're an exporter, you want to know if the pricing that what you're selling your fruit at is realistic or not. Then this is going to be the best available indicator. Like if you're within this margin, then chances are you're kind of at the level that the industry is selling their fruit. And I think that's particularly relevant at a time like right now when the volume spiked in Peruvian exports. And that has caused a sudden shock to prices. So if we go back up to, or come back down here, we'll clean this chart up a bit. We can see the 2022-2023 season. We can see that prices have been tracking relatively well with the 2023-2024 season. But what this tool tells us is that the last 3 weeks, prices have dropped considerably. And that is a direct reaction to the increase in volume that we've been seeing. So we'll clean this, and we can see that the last 3 weeks, volumes have jumped compared to 23-24 and heading up to the higher levels that we saw in 22-23. So if you look at this logically, there's a narrative behind the change in data points that we're able to see. And it goes to reason that prices should drop in the weeks that we're observing. And what the tool tells us is that prices should drop based on this information that we're observing. Lastly, we have value. We ran the exact same algorithm on value, and we're able to see that value is underreported for Peru, but it does update in time. And I think there's an interesting story behind this as well. So this is the theory that we're working with. We haven't been able to verify it. Some Peruvian exporters that we work with have confirmed this loosely. But what we're going with right now, at least, is by and large exports. The value of exports is underreported when the fruit leaves. And as the money comes into Peru as the fruit arrives at port, and containers are received by their clients, the money comes back in, that those values are reconciled in time. And that's what the updates to this parameter are, that we're able to see in the degree of certainty tool. So this is an overview of the tool, kind of some of its use cases, some of the narratives behind the tool. Peru is the best information that we currently make available in global trade data. And the fact that it functions the way it does, makes the degree of certainty tool particularly useful for this data set. So with that, I'll let Sarah dive a bit deeper into kind of the mechanics of how the calculations are made and everything, and then come back to you with some other use cases and exceptions that we have for the calculations that we offer through the global trade data system. So we'll pass this off to Sarah. Thank you very much. And I'll go ahead and mute myself.
Thank you, Colin. Hi, everyone. I was the data scientist working on this project, and this algorithm was actually a multi-step process that started with data acquisition and went all the way to data visualization. The first step in the algorithm was importing the data, and here we used different APIs to basically gather all of the data that we were able to collect. And then we ended up with multiple CSV files. And then we moved on to the next step, which was data wrangling. And in this step, we basically defined a set of filters such as trade flow, use, category, and reporter to extract the data that was relevant to the calculations that we were going to carry out. So let's say if you were looking at Peruvian exports, here we defined the reporter as Peru and the trade flow as exports. Moving on to the next step was we came up with the percentage difference calculations. This was a very critical step because this is where we defined the deviation that existed between the most recently reported data and the data that was reported before that. So what I mean by that is, let's say if we got a fresh data set just yesterday, and we were interested in looking at week 32 for Peruvian prices, we would look at the last data point that was reported yesterday and compare that same data point to the data that was reported for week 32 in the past couple of weeks, or all of the data that was reported in the past for week 32. And then we would try to quantify the how much deviation exists between those points. So this was a very critical step in our algorithm. And then we moved on to average error calculations. And here what we did was we carried out a row-wise operation on our data frame and saved our calculations in a singular column. Moving on to the next step, we had an error corrective restoration step. This is where we try to recover the original value from the error that was inherently present in the data. So this was also an important part. And after we carried this out, we had another step, which was standard deviation calculation, which was similar to the way we carried out the average errors. This was also a row-wise function. We calculated the standard deviation for every row in our previous data frame. Moving on to the last two steps, we had the estimated value calculations. And here we had two steps. First, we calculated the fraction of the original value that remains after the error, and then use that fraction to reverse the error and recover the original unadjusted value. So the idea here is that since we were able to calculate the average error and we also had the original data, we used both of these quantities to sort of recover or free the data from the error that was originally present. And then we use that as a sort of estimated value that you can see on the top here. Then last step in our algorithm was calculating the degree of certainty bounds. And here what we did was we took two multiples of the standard deviation and added those to the expected value to get the upper bound. And for the lower bound, we subtracted two multiples of the standard deviation from the expected value. So this was actually a simple summary of all the steps that went into our algorithm. And now Colin is going to pick up from where he left off. Over to you, Colin.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah. So we'll move on from Peru, which is a great example and really one of the most powerful data sets that we have available in the service. But the global trade data system makes data from all around the world available. And that's offers a very, when we ran this tool across all the other data sets, we came across some really, really interesting information. So for example, here we're looking at exports from the Netherlands. This is the second largest exporter in the world, mostly because they re-export everything that they get from Latin America, South Africa, etc. Their biggest client is Germany. But this is a very interesting use case because when we get the reports, in this case, we get them directly from Eurostat, there's this kind of drop off in data where the last data point is a collection of countries, but is this tiny little point there. And honestly, when we first started looking at the data, we're like, well, this is discard information. Like it doesn't really have any actual value. But when we ran the degree of certainty tool over it, we discovered that this little straggling data point out here is a really good indicator of what will eventually be reported for the rest of the origins. We're not entirely sure why this is, but a going theory is that one export office or maybe Schiffel that might report on flights going out, they might have a heads up, or like they might have earlier reporting than the rest of the country. And they, as an export office, they have a representation of what will be exported to the rest of the customers based on all of the fruit that's coming in. That's a bit theoretical, but what this means in practice is that this point is way lower than will eventually be, but it's incredibly consistently lower. So this might be 94, 95% error, but it's always around there. And we ran the error ranges on it, and we can see that given the massive jump that we see in the estimated values when we add in that error, the error ranges are incredibly stable. So all of a sudden, this little straggling data point that we have out here is useful, and it helps set an expectation for what is being exported from the country. And here we can see it's a slight increase. When we compare that to the historical data, a slight increase kind of helps give some perspective as to what the exports from the Netherlands look like. We ran this across the pricing, the volume, and the value. And we can see that with pricing, kind of the opposite of Peru, the Netherlands tends to overreport. Again, if these are volumes that are being exported by plane, that would make complete sense. So what we've done is looked at the entire history that we're working with and added that value into the estimated values, which would give us a much lower price. So this is kind of what we expect to happen. And then we put that error range on it to help explain what, based on this historic data, what the most likely scenario is for this data point going into the future. And then value works very much the same as volume. That's one example. We can get into more examples, especially in the question and answer section of this presentation. Like, I don't want to get drag on this monologue for any longer than we need to. I'll look at a couple exceptions. So one of them is the United States, and we aren't able to calculate the historical data for the United States, and also the global trade data not only has exports, it also has imports. The reason for this is because the source, which in this case is the US Census Bureau, doesn't update their information once it's been published. So they wait about, so the beginning of the month they'll publish the previous month's information. So right now we have July's data. And once they publish this, they don't change it. Like, it's published, that is the official record, and there it stays. Since there are no changes, there's nothing for us to measure. So there is no measurement as a consequence. The other situation where we're not able to measure error is when the data is inferred. For Mexico, for example, there is no source for Mexican exports. I've looked very, very hard. If there's anybody from Aniveris in the group, we worked together on that and tried to work with the Mexican government to get the export information, particularly for blueberries. It was not made available. That was a change in the government. So and this is particularly relevant because Mexico is a massive exporter of blueberries, and I think in last year in 2023 it was the third largest exporter of blueberries in the world. So we want to know what's going on with Mexico. The way that we compensate for the lack of official information is we use all of the information made available by the trade partners. So in this case, we're not necessarily looking at Mexican exports. What we're really looking at is the imports reported by every single country in the world that we have in our data set that reports imports from Mexico. And so we kind of turn the entire database around, and we're able to get a much better idea of Mexican exports, who their trade partners are, and how the origin has developed over the years. And again, based on their trade partners' information. However, because this isn't coming in from one source, and this kind of comes in very randomly, the error rates we get for this type of data are massive. And the current degree of certainty tool that we make available, that we've designed as of yet, isn't able to handle that complexity. So the error rates are unfortunately unavailable for those data sets. That is the prepared section of our webinar. I'd like to remind everybody, if you'd like to have a private conversation, we will send the team to Fruit Attraction and the IFPA, and we're very happy to meet you at those events. Please write to us at info@agronometrics. If you have any other questions, I'm very happy to answer them now. I see that in the question and answer section, we do have a couple entries so far, and we'll get to answering them. The first question is from Borja. Are the prices FOB? And that was kind of at the beginning of the presentation, so I imagine that was with the Peru section. For Peru, yes, they are FOB. When we're looking at imports, those prices tend to be CIF, not in every single case. We're working on building a tool to better communicate that. That's a question we actually get pretty frequently. But yes, generally speaking, for exports, prices are FOB. For imports, prices are CIF. One very, very obvious and glaring exception to that is the inferred data. So like Mexico that we just looked at. The prices that we make available from Mexico, because we're actually looking at the imports, those would be Mexican CIF prices. Does Agronometrics integrate or plan to integrate trade risk management platforms? Also, given that you're thought leaders in the blueberry space, do you plan to expand this to other crops? We do not currently integrate any trade risk management platforms. We'd be happy to follow up and learn more about what that might look like. Encourage you to write to info@agronometrics.com to follow up on that. Do we plan on expanding this to any other crops? Absolutely. Yes. That is our goal for next year. Kind of the philosophy with which we're building is you can kind of do a little bit of everything or do a lot of bit of one specific thing. So our goal is to have blueberries as useful a tool as we can. Focus our effort and our time on that because we only have limited amounts of effort and time. And all these tools that we build then is going to be much easier to roll them out to other commodities. I mean, when we're looking at trade data, this not only applies to the harmonized shipping codes with which blueberries are reported, which is a fairly complicated commodity because they're kind of shared with raspberries and you need to do a lot of like data backflips to clean that out. When we start working with grapes and avocados and all these other commodities, then we're going to be able to integrate these tools that we've kind of perfected with blueberries much faster for that entire community as well. The next question is from Mel Garcia. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm really enjoying all of it. Thank you. I want to know if you have same experience or service for the rest of the berries, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries. Kind of going back to the previous question that was answered, it's on the way. Raspberries and blackberries are also really tricky to work with, especially when we're talking about trade data, because the harmonized shipping codes for much of the world are shared. So, and breaking that out is going to be more challenging even than working with blueberries. But that is in the pipeline. It's something that our clients have requested fervently, and we're building the tools to be able to handle that level of complexity. So yes, it's in the works, and we will, when we do make that available, we hope to make that available with all of the tools that we've currently made the blueberry market data available with. From Andres Sandoval, I understand that your platform will project prices. I want to know if these are only export prices and how many weeks are projected. So currently, we're not projecting any prices. Eventually, this is a point that we want to be able to get to. To do that, you need to build a monster of a machine. And the macroeconomic models that need to be built into a price forecast for commodity that's as globally traded as blueberries is incredibly complex. That said, that is exactly what we're building. And you're able to appreciate some of that complexity by looking at the export data and the import data that we're currently working with. We're going to continue to expand upon this. And the first thing that we'll eventually do is try to bring as many data sets up to now as we possibly can. So Peru is a great example of that. We have Peruvian data now, and that gives us really good insights with which we can forecast going into the future. Um, we're gonna have to systematize this. We need to bring science to it, and that is an area that we're working on. It's not currently available, but we definitely encourage you to sign up for the service. Every client of the global trade data is helping us build this kind of vision of having an entirely integrated global tool to be able to track, I mean, not only kind of what's happening around the world, but what the implications of what's happening in the world are for all of their client markets. So if we know what's going on in Peru, how will that affect China, US, Netherlands, Chile, Brazil, any of these integrated markets? Um, and that's what we're going to. It's a ton of work. This will not happen tomorrow, but we're working on it, and it's a very fun project to be a part of. Which country is so? This is from Suresh Uthapan, and I'm probably butchering that, and I apologize. But which country is growing large-scale organic blueberry farming? So this kind of better goes back to the work that we're doing with the IBO. The country that I believe is growing the largest organic blueberries, that has the largest organic blueberry farming operations is the US. Um, Notable to that is Chile and Peru. There's been a heavy investment in organic blueberry farming in those, a lot of organic blueberry. It's really interesting, but I believe the king that wears that title is the Pacific Northwest. I'd have to probably, this is kind of like off the top of my head. I could dive deeper into it to get a better feel for it. Um, so from Kelvin Ong. Kelvin, JWM Asia. Hi, does the data include China blueberries data available too? It does. So we get the information on Chinese trade directly from the Export Authority in China. And we've integrated that into the system right along with every other data set that we work with. They also do not update it. And so we can, no, let's see. Um, Small technical details. All right. So within the Global Blueberry Trade Data Service, we're able to, we have a bunch of countries listed. These are like the top 30 countries that move blueberries in the world. China is among them. You can also go to the drop down and select it. But here we can look at the latest import and export information made available by the Chinese government. So we can see the exports, which have grown monumentally again this year compared to the previous year. That's actually a really exciting trend, especially seeing the growth, not and the growth of Chinese exports, but the quality of the fruit that's going out. And you look at the pricing that they're getting for these volumes, and it's impressive. The main clients for Chinese blueberries are Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand. Russia, to an extent, it's not a lot of high quality blueberries that go to Russia, and you can kind of see that by the pricing. And Russia is kind of bottom of the barrel pricing, but we can also go to imports, and you can start to see the first arrivals from Peru already reported by the Chinese government, and the same information is made available. So you can kind of see how pricing this year compares to previous years, last 10 years, so on and so forth. But yes, we work very, very hard to cover every single country of the world. and make that information readily available through the Global Trade Data Service. From Gregory Connor Jr. Does your tool offer explanations as to the decrease, increase in exports, weather, famine, etc.? Will you plan to work with up and coming blueberry markets in developing countries, especially in Africa? So, good question. And to an extent, yes, we make all of the information like kind of there's two main types of information that we work with in the global within our service per se. So one of them is the objective hard data. That's kind of most of what we covered in this presentation. The other one is the narrative, and that's where you can go to stories and really, I mean, you can look at per blueberry expects higher volumes with a flatter peak. So this kind of tells you that soft story of kind of what's going on with the blueberry industry. If you want to get into developing countries, especially in Africa, then my advice would be go to the IBO and check out the IBO report, which our team headed up. So you'll be able to see much of this data, at least a snapshot of the data that we make available through the Global Trade Data Service through the IBO report. And that is complemented with really great narrative put together by Matt Ogg, one of our journalists. And this report really looks to address exactly that question. We go very, very in depth into as many emerging markets and small producers that are up and coming, that have the potential and are building energy behind them that could change the narrative for the blueberry industry going forward. So yes, absolutely, definitely check out the IBO report. It's like 230 pages, and that's what that volume of information is what allows us to cover that level of depth. From anonymous attender, is it possible to see accumulated figures for calculating year-to-date volume, prices, etc., instead of seeing figures for each day, week, year? Sometimes we analyze campaigns with specific timeframes. So within the service, you have the facility of doing this. There isn't a button that we've made that where that is readily available, but you can open up any one of the charts until, of course, like we're doing a demo and this whole thing works strangely. But you can open up any one of the charts that is made available through the dashboards that we're previously looking at. And this data can then readily be downloaded. You can bring this out into an Excel and then make any calculations you wish. Actually, within the data navigation tool, you can also, I mean, kind of play with it. And I say you want to look at, you want to get really nerdy with the data and look at a long period of history, download this, and then do your own analysis on like how the market has evolved. So we're able to see all of the data that we have available for the Chinese market, which is perhaps not as complete as we'd like it to be since 2016. But from then, it gives us a really good idea what the evolution of the category is. For example, what the role of Chile in China has been, and then how that has changed with the onset of Peru. All of this information can be downloaded, and then you can look at it with an Excel and make any kind of year-to-date calculations with it, or otherwise that you deem fit. Let's see, from Eric Angel, could you please share with us the presentation as well as detailed step-by-step process to calculate errors? For Eric Angel, we'd be very happy to do that, especially the detailed step-by-step calculations with our clients. So please sign up, and we'll be very happy to kind of get deeper into the weeds and expand on this as much as you may need or would like. Henry Redmond, congratulations, Colin, for this presentation. Thank you very much. Sebastian Castillo, excellent tool. What days is the information updated in agronometrics? So every Monday we update the information for every source that we work with. Not all sources post at the same time. But what is made available every Monday is Peru, which updates every Monday. So every Monday we have the information available for the previous week. From Henry Remond, do you have information regarding demand in the US by ages, genders, states? Thank you. So for demand in the US, that's kind of, you can look at this in very many ways. On one side, the USDA tools that we make available do break out all of the US trade data by states. So in that sense, we and not so much the demand. So we don't know what exactly is being consumed by each one of these states. We do know what is being produced. We do not track age and gender. There's other companies that are doing that, but that's mostly survey-based questions. What we're really making available through our tools is the trade data. And from Kelvin Ong, excellent information. Thank you. All right. Well, I think if there's, let's see, from Pablo Fraga. Thank you very much, Colin. Can you tell us info regarding the pricing of the tool and if it's included in the old USDA subscription? Yes, we can. So for access to, let's see. So for access to the Global Trade Data Service, we're currently making that available for $10,000 a year subscription. And that gives each company that subscribes 5 access accounts. It is not currently included in the old USDA subscription. Obviously, the USDA information is very, very valuable. But when we start looking at the entire world, it is a much larger pie that we're looking at. And there's been years and years of work that has gone into building this tool. So we do have to mark it up to a price that allows really the company to continue to building this kind of infrastructure and offer the industry these kind of insights. If you would like to know more, by all means, again, we encourage you to write to us at info@agronometrics.com. And feel free to ask us whatever questions you wish on one hand. Also, if you'd like to set up a meeting with our teams that will be going to Fruit Attraction and the IFPA show in Atlanta, we would be very happy to set that up. And all right, I think unless there's any other questions that come up, I think we'd be very happy to leave the presentation there. What we will make available is the video of this call will be sent to all attendees and anybody that signed up. And should you, again, we would love to make ourselves available to all of your questions and any doubts that you may have about our tool. Also, any insights that you might want to share or otherwise, then we would be very happy to address them. And if we can't answer the question, like obviously figure out. All right, we got one more question, and this will be the last one that I answer. Then after this, we'll check out and let everybody get back to their day. From Suresh Kutapan, and I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm doing that wrong. I apologize. Which internationals are suitable for Indian blueberry? What are the export regulations and requirements for blueberry from India? How can we establish connection with international fruit importers and distributors? So, very good questions. I'm not going to be able to answer all of them. What we can look at is the trade data made available in the Global Trade Data Service for India. And again, we've compiled the entire world into this data set. So we're able to see all of the imports, and there are exports. There's a big jump in exports, particularly to the UAE. So I would say a good starting point to look at where an Indian might want to export is look at the Middle East and Singapore. Those appear to be the most attractive markets for an Indian exporter. You can kind of see the pricing that is being fetched within these markets. Singapore is normally, which makes sense, has the highest pricing. And we can see how that evolves over a very specific season. Um, when you're looking at a trade, there's obviously a lot of factors that go into it. I mean, one of them is going to be what the trade barriers are going to be. So, for example, like what the duties and taxes might be for a specific commodity from one country to another. And that might make blueberries much more interesting that might make the commercialization of Indian blueberries in the UAE, for example, much more interesting than going to Sri Lanka. I mean, the markets will be different, obviously, and there's money in the UAE. But especially if there's trade barriers that are between them, that's something that needs to be taken into account. What we're able to see is what is currently happening, and that can be a really good starting point to start your investigation as to where to import. If you want to look at or where to export, if you want to look at imports and see where fruit is coming from, then this tool also offers really great insights into um, what the market currently looks like, what the trends for arrivals are. So when is the fruit coming in? And the biggest supplier, at least last year, was clearly Peru. You can see Peru's season is starting up. So then this will fill Indian bellies, and they'll get very delicious blueberries. And you can also get a good idea of what the market price, what the going prices are for within the CIF prices for imported fruit in this market, and then also like what the value of imports has been. So yeah, I mean that's a basic overview of the tool and the service. And I think in particular, the degree of certainty tool, which is brand new and we hope a really, really useful way of looking at this data and making more informed decisions where otherwise the information that we have available can be not necessarily limited, but perhaps obscured. And again, anybody has any other questions, please feel free to write to us. And if nothing else, we look forward to seeing you at Fruit Attraction in Madrid, as well as the IFPA show in Atlanta. Any other questions? By all means, please write to us. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.